This year marks the 21st season of work in the Lower Safi. As I mentioned, many of the years, more recent years, focused on the sugar industry and the medieval period. But it is part of this project which has spanned 21 years. And that report now, the first volume of that report has been submitted for publication by the Palestine Exploration Fund in London. And it is an ongoing process now to complete the second volume. This year also marks the 33rd year that I've been working in Jordan. So I'm very happy to be presenting to you the, third really project that I've directed in Jordan, excavation project. And it's been a great journey, and I plan to continue, and I plan to publish as much as possible, I promise. Looking at the focal point now of the project was in the southeast end of the Dead Sea, the shores of the Dead Sea. This is where the Ghawr Safi is located. You can see it here, this green patch, which is basically an agricultural land. It's the largest alluvial fan east of the Jordan, and it's fed by the Wadi al-Hassa, the great river or wadi of the Wadi al-Hassa. It's the second biggest wadi, second biggest outflow of water in Jordan, in the east of Jordan. But its uniqueness has been that it has a large landmass. You can see it here in the southeastern end of the Dead Sea. Wadi Mujib, farther north, is actually a larger river wadi, but it doesn't have the same kind of landmass. It doesn't have an alluvial a fan and an area where human habitation could have and would have existed. There is none in the Wadi Mujib, but here in the Wadi al-Hassa, the south of the Dead Sea, it's the main area on the Dead Sea, populated over 13,000 years. I suppose you can compare it in the Jordan Valley, in the Dead Sea area, to Jericho, but that's in the western part, and it's certainly not something we're discussing today. But if one wants to look at comparison, for comparison purposes, the agricultural areas, the alluvial fans of Jericho, there's a similarity here with the Lower Safi. The Dead Sea itself has fluctuated over the years, and it's, as you can see here, over a period of some 2,500, 3,000 years ago. The level of the Dead Sea has gone up and down according to the rainfall, to the climate of the time. And it's interesting that the peaks where it's wetter also correlate to the periods of more occupation, more archaeological finds. You see here at about, the beginning of the chart here on the right, around 2400 BC. That's 4,500 years ago. The early Bronze Age, was quite wet. We have some of the biggest archaeological remains from the early Bronze Age. Then there's a great dip, and we also don't have many archaeological finds up until the so-called Hellenistic Nabatean period, about 200, 100 BC. And this, we have an increase of rainfall. And it's interesting that this is also a period of great growth in the Dead Sea area and, of course, Jordan in general. So the climate corresponds to it. It's wetter. You can produce more agriculture and therefore feed more people, have an increase in population. The next peak, which is actually the highest peak, is represented here in this chart at around 400 to 500 AD. And that's the so-called early Byzantine period, late Roman Byzantine period. And this is the wettest period, and it corresponds extremely well with the archaeological finds in Jordan and in the area, in the Levant in general, but in Jordan particularly, where we have the largest number of sites found from this period. The Department of Antiquities, which registers sites, has the numbers. I don't have it on hand, but the largest number of individual sites come from this period of the 4th, 5th, 6th centuries AD, during this Byzantine period, and just leading up to the early Islamic period. There's a drop again in the 9th, 10th centuries, and an increase again by the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th centuries. The period of the Fatimid, Abbasid, and then much more in the Ayyubid Mamluk period, which is the focus of our sugar industry. So you see here a relatively wetter period, not as wet as the Byzantine or as the preceding Nabatean Hellenistic period, but relatively wetter, and this ability to maintain agricultural products, in this case, our sugar canes, our sugar industry, is evident from the chart. Now, looking at the geology, which we've just been talking about, here we have a brilliant section of all the geological periods above the Ghawr Safi, just above where the sugar industry was taking place, and we have all the geological periods brilliantly portrayed here, beginning with the some of the oldest sedimentary limestone layers on top, followed by Nubian sandstones, the red sandstones of Petra. You can see them here in red. And then the Precambrian Sardmuj conglomerates, which have the best, are depicted best here in the Ghawr Safi, this dark patch. These are volcanic stones. These represent the oldest geology on the Earth's surface. About half a billion years ago, 600 million years ago. Then we've got the washing down of the so-called colluvials, the washing down over the centuries and many thousands of years, really, of the debris. And finally, at the bottom, the Lisan, or the old Dead Sea, the Lisan deposits, the deposits of the old Lake Lisan, about 70 to 12,000 years ago. And what we have here is interesting because, in fact, one of the bases of geology, begun from 19th century by George Lyell, was that whatever's lowest is oldest, and archaeology has kind of followed that principle. But in this case, it's completely reversed, and we have the youngest at the bottom. And this is one of the great features, interesting features of the Jordan Rift Valley, and particularly here in the Ghawr Safi. I have to begin almost immediately by looking at one of the main problems that we've had in this Ghawr Safi, because it was an area which is not very worked at. There wasn't much field work, archaeological field work, until the 1970s, and actually even later in the 80s. So up until then, it was not abandoned, but it was an area which was not very well developed, and it was kind of not looked after. A series of agricultural irrigation projects by the Jordanian government came up accidentally by digging underground water channels and pipes, came up with antiquities, and quite a lot of antiquities. In those days, unfortunately, there wasn't the local Department of Antiquities. There wasn't really much interest in the area, but the local people, quite poor, began tomb robbing, and some of this material appeared on the international antiquities market. By this time, I had been working in the area on the Lot's sanctuary site, and we began to see this problem and focused our attention increasingly on trying to stop it. First, to record and to open our eyes to see what's happening, because really nobody knew there was such a rich area for antiquities, and then to see what we could do. Sometimes, collecting what we could from the surface, or for whoever was willing to give us things. So the Ghawr Safi project very much began as a kind of a rescue project, and that's why even today the Department of Antiquities of Jordan has it on its list of endangered sites. There's been great progress since then. With the Department of Antiquities, we've basically stopped tomb robbing. There's still an ongoing problem of protecting the sites, but it's not at all as as bad as it used to be. From the beginning of the project, we started looking at old aerial photographs, and by walking, surveying, we started mapping in various areas of the sites of the Ghawr Safi. And here you have one of our first maps made from a black and white aerial photograph from 1922. We identified a number of sites, beginning from the Neolithic sites, such as Wadi Hamrash, but going all the way through Bronze Age sites, some unknown, such as the tombs, the Middle Bronze tombs, others, such as the Iron Age site of Musa Hamid. But as you can see here, various sites of Byzantine and Nebatean interest. But here, particularly, what we'll be focusing on is the site called Tawabin, Tawahin as-Sukkar, the mills of the sugar, right here. And this were known for at least 100 years, but not excavated properly. So our survey work was one of the first important parts of the project. Since then, and again, with the help of our sponsors, we've been able to have updated maps. This colored one here from the year 2000 is actually taken from a satellite, and it was also formed the base of the map, which is now on the site produced by the SCHEP USAID project funding. So identifying, verifying all the various sites, also showing how this developed and how there's actually encroaching agriculture in this interesting and actually quite rich archaeological area of the Ghawr Safi. More detailed contour surveys and various other intensive surveys were conducted over the years by our project. And again, the focal point now here, you can see here in the upper right, is the remnants of what we call the Tawahin as-Sukkar. What we've now identified is actually much more than just a mill or a press, but rather a whole complex of buildings, and some belonging to some later periods. So our contour surveys here done by various surveyors, but particularly the one on the left in purple, which is the final one done by Kutaiba Dasuki of he used to belong to the Department of Antiquities. And with support of the department, we were able to produce these final maps, which are now going to be published. Beginning from the history of the area, it was an important site from biblical times, but it was very well known from the Roman and Byzantine period, the early Christian period of the Byzantine world. And it was located as Zoara in Palestinia Tertia, the fourth Palestinian section of the area here of ancient Palestine. Here you can see here very near to the Sanctuary of Lot, which I worked at, and very much part of this decades of work that I've been doing. Again, the satellite photograph showing you here very clearly how green it is, how agriculturally important it is. Agriculture was the basis of the economic prosperity of Ghawr Safi, or ancient Zoara, through the ages. Here you have the previous project that I mentioned already, the Lot Sanctuary project. This and Zoara itself, the city, are located on the Madaba map. Here you see on the left a detail of the Madaba map up above, where it says Tatu Ayu Lot, no, not Toyota, but the monastery of Lot. And on the upper right, you have the excavated site, fully excavated by the year 2004, before shelter was placed over the site with its mosaics. And down below, you have a view of the Ghawr Safi and the Wadi al-Hassa. And as it was identified or depicted in the Madaba mosaic map, it is also depicted here. You can see a photograph of palm trees, date palms. The Sanctuary of Lot project now has been fully published. The site's been restored. As I mentioned, there's even a shelter. This is an old project, but it was the foundation for us to continue in Zoara and the Ghawr Safi. So it really is the prelude to the current project. As you can see here on the left, it's the cover of the book, which has been published and is available actually this evening. And at any time, if anybody wants to buy a copy from ACOR, it is available. So this lovely reconstruction really was the grand finale of our project, and we're very proud to have this publication and to have the site actually fully restored, conserved, and open for tourism. And this is our objective also for the other sites, such as the Tawabin as-Sukkar, the sugar factory site. Before I move on to that, just to mention that this year, SCHEP, USAID SCHEP, gave some extra support to remake the fence and the signs which were broken. So part of the entire project here, it's not focused on just one site, but it's focused on a group of sites, so people can, when visitors come, they can see a number of sites, including the museum, which we'll mention a bit later, and some of the local activities of the local people of the Ghawr Safi. So very much trying to create and maintain a package of work, of sites and things to see in the Ghawr Safi. Another interesting part of the Ghawr Safi, which I mentioned briefly, unknown site of Tulilat Qasr Musa Hamid. This seems to be now identified as the biblical Zoara for those who are interested in the biblical sites. We did a contour survey that did several trenches, found some interesting finds such as this pottery chalice, but the site is backfilled and not actually available for visitation, but it is part of the history of the project, and again, it will be featuring in the publication of Zoara, which will be coming out this next year. Another important part of the Ghawr Safi project is the fortress of Tawabin. This is quite an impressive fortress, primarily seems to be Nabatean. Here are some of the fine objects that we've collected from the surface: Nabatean pottery, some painted stucco, similar to the painted stucco we find in Petra itself, in Azantur. A fragment of looks like what is a horse's hoof. So a Hellenistic. We didn't find this horse, but we only found the hoof. A similar kind of Hellenistic model, clay model, has been found in other sites. And inscriptions on the left here. There's an incense burner with a Nabatean name, again, clearly identifying the site as a Nabatean site, since we even have the language, the letters. And there is also another Nabatean inscription down below the site. So we have clear indications of an important Nabatean fortress of Tawabin, which is mentioned in Roman and Byzantine sources. Now, Roman and Byzantine sources talk about Zoara. We've talked about the Madaba map. Here it is on the left again, a walled city with towers and date palms around it. We've actually uncovered similar kind of architecture. This is possibly an entranceway. It was arched. You can see here the Springer arches. It was mentioned as an important, Zoara was mentioned as an important agricultural city. As I said, it was on the Madaba map. Also from the Babatha letters, a group of papyri written in Greek on the west side of the Dead Sea. Here you have the mention. Here you can see Zoara. It mentions a lady who inherited agricultural property in Zoara. So talking about this as a rich agricultural area. And also it was on the list of bishoprics. There was a bishop from Zoara that actually was represented in the church councils in Nicaea or Nicaea, modern Iznik. And here is a tombstone of one of the bishops, Apsi. This is one of the many tombstones we've been able to recover from the destruction and the tomb robbing. So an important historical city with historical sources, and what our object was to do is to focus on all periods, but this was also particularly important. This is the focus at Khirbet Sheik Isa on the 6th century AD, and I can very proudly announce to you that last year we uncovered what was at the base of the excavations a 6th century AD paved street and mosaics, which you'll see here now, were part of a very large church. This is the church which I'm identifying as the Episcopal Church of Zoara, the Bishop's Church, badly damaged by people walking on it in the later Abbasid period. There was no destruction intentionally. It was just people were living on the mosaics. And as you can see here through the doorway, they're walking through and the mosaic cubes, the mosaic floors have just kind of become unstuck. But quite high quality mosaic. And here you have roughly where we think it is, much part of a much larger church, but that's for future work, perhaps not for me, for others to excavate, but for a much larger project. I should just note here before we move on that you see the cross here in the upper left-hand corner. This was found by accident or by chance by the Jordanian conservator of the Department of Antiquities. And he said, we found some steps leading down into, not a room, but a smaller depression. And it's turned out to be a baptistery, very few baptisteries have been excavated. The best parallel might be the one in Petra, in the so-called Petra Church. It's important because it shows that there is an ongoing conversion of people to Christianity. And because it's a large adult baptistry, it means the people are not Christians and they're being baptized as Christians. If the Christian community was already Christian, they would have smaller baptismal fonts for children. Anyhow, this was a quite exciting discovery, not exactly part of the sugar industry, but it was quite an exciting discovery as far as the project was concerned. And I'm presenting it here really in public for the first time. Part of that USAID SCHEP funding went to training in mosaic documentation. Here you have on the left here some of the trainees that were copying cube by cube the mosaic. This is a way of preserving it, well, recording it forever. If it's damaged somehow, we still have a one-to-one record of it. And there was ongoing conservation. We had a conservation program from before, working on pottery and other materials here. Some basic conservation or stabilization of the mosaics was taking place with one of our conservators in conjunction with the Department of Antiquities conservator. So transferring of knowledge here, sponsored by the USAID SCHEP program, was very valuable. Now, I mentioned earlier a couple of inscriptions. We have a very large collection, a very important and large collection of inscriptions that have been found in the Ghawr Safi, some through excavation, some through, chance finds. But these have now been fully published in 3 volumes. This is a selection of them. They're very important for a number of reasons. They give us occupations, they give us dates, but they also show that even though Greek was being used by the local people, many of the names were actually Arabic or Nabatean. You see here this one, Dusarios, Nabatean name, Sosana Obedianos. These are not Greek names, but the language is Greek. So as I'm speaking to you in English now, in the same way, it was the lingua franca, the international language of the day. There is also Palestinian Aramaic and a couple of inscriptions, which is more understandable since this was Semitic language and belonged to this part of the world. These are also available. The publication is also available. There's actually only one set left here in Jordan. They're difficult to find, but if anyone's interested in it, otherwise ACOR Library does have all these books, and you're more than welcome, I'm sure, to look at them and read them. Part of the SCHEP program was to reorganize some of the museum storage. So we worked on it with the trainees and mount some of these important inscriptions for display. These particular ones are ones that show the days of the week: Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Each one actually is a tombstone, but it talks about the day that the person died and the year and the month. So the day is actually very interesting. It gives us the 7 days of the week. As I said, these are published now in 3 volumes, and here you have the cover of the first volume, and if anyone's interested, as I said, they're available. The main focus of this lecture, though, is going to be on the sugar industry and the preceding industries related to the chemical industry. And what I'm showing here to you is a very interesting map from the 12th century showing you Zoara or Zoara. It's the Islamic period, the medieval Islamic period name for Zoara or the Ghawr Safi is Zoara. We have a number of ancient and modern writers actually mentioning them here. We list some of them. In the 2nd century AD, Babatha, Jerome in the 5th, 4th century AD, 8th century AD, St. Stephen the Sabite, 9th century Ibn Majid, 10th century Baptistery, 10th century again Ibn Hakal, 10th, 11th century the Karaganiza, 1150 al-Idrisi, and here we have actually a map of al-Idrisi's mentioning. Here you have Zoara or Ghawr. William of Tyre during the Crusader period, and another Crusader, Fulshur of Chartres in the 12th century, and the Russian abbot Daniel. So known through the medieval period, early and later medieval periods, as Zogar, and they discussed it, as an agricultural center with a particular emphasis on these two new products: first indigo, then sugar. Before I get into sugar, indigo, which was very much a precursor to the sugar industry, as it involved a chemical process. It wasn't a simple agricultural product like dates or potatoes or whatever. It involved growing, but then processing, rotting, and processing of the plant, the indigo plant, to make this blue dye. And in our excavations, we found two such pots, which were made for rotting and processing indigo plants, which eventually would have produced this blue dye through a process of additives and time. So here you have these two pots, and through another project which was actually sponsored by UNESCO, we were able to revitalize this, and we found that one of the pots, similar to the ones on our excavations, are still existing in Oman today. And some Omanis came and helped to recreate this indigo processing in the local community with a women's project. And this is the kabaya, similar to the one we found, but the one that's existing in Oman. We also found indigo crucibles, these copper alloy kind of little cups, which were made to collect this concentrated blue dye, this indigo blue dye. We found two on here on the right in our excavations, in roughly the 10th century AD, late Abbasid Fatimid period. And similar ones have been found in Iran in the 11th century period. And there are ones here that were in the Victoria and Albert Museum and in the British Museum in London. The connection is very interesting because this is where many of the Indian products and sugarcane and indigo and other Indian products have come through Iran. So particularly Khorasan in Iran, Persia, is a link between India, the great Indian civilizations, and subcontinent civilizations, and the Arab Peninsula and the Levant. So here we have hard evidence, archaeological evidence of not only for indigo, but connections with India via Persia. We also have some vats that we found in Zogar, which could have been, they've been interpreted as indigo vats, large vats where this processing would have taken place. Don Whitcomb of the University of Chicago has mentioned this in a publication, that these could be used for indigo. The Ghawr Safi, and looking at now the structures of the Tawabin as-Sukkar, the sugar factory, these are some of the earliest image we have on the left is a photograph, and the structures are fairly well preserved. Also, the area is in tomb rub, which is interesting. On the right is a painting done a couple of years ago of the Tawabin as-Sukkar by artist Jean Bradbury, who works with us in Jordan, the Ghawr Safi. But two images showing you. But I will go almost immediately now to one of the most important historical pieces of evidence for the importance of the sugar industry in the Jordan Valley as a whole, the Al-Ghawr. In Damascus, in the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, if you enter here through where Muslims enter in this black and white photograph, almost immediately you see this column here on the right, and it's a long inscription. It's a decree by the Caliph Abu Nasr Bursal in the 9th century. It's 9th century Abu Hijra or the 15th century AD, and it particularly mentions that the sugar from the Al-Ghawr is a property of the Caliph. State-sponsored industry. That's what this was about. There are literally, there are not dozens, but hundreds of sugar factories lined along the Jordan Valley in Palestine and Jordan. And these all form one of a very large sugar production industry. So we're not talking about one or two individual farms. We're talking about large state-sponsored industry. What we have, and these are now some of our final reconstructions and our plans that have been done over the last couple of years, showing you the remnants of the Tawahina Sukkar, or the mills, the underground water, how the water turned the wheels and crushed the sugar canes and the juices that were poured out and collected and processed and crystallized into what we know as sugar. So these are our studies now, which have come to a conclusion almost. Here's a nice section showing you again that water channel, how the water power was used via acequias to move these large stones, these grinding stones, and to press the juice and collect the juice then um, uh, into another processing area. The water itself was used to power this large paddle wheel, this wooden paddle wheel. And here we have a unpublished as yet reconstruction of our paddle wheel. I'm very proud to present this also as a first time in public. And the water then was used to irrigate the fields, below in the agricultural fields, particularly the sugarcane fields. So we have a type of water channels, a type of processing that's coming actually from there's connections with the Sasanian world again in Persia. Here we have the water, the sugar channel that I mentioned to you. Here you can see the channel, and it was a clean channel because it was meant to be for food. So we actually found some pieces of lead that would have lined this channel and would have kept it pressed sugar juice clean, and it would have gone to this area here, to the right here, towards the northeast, where the processing of the sugar juice happened. And here are two of the collecting vats which we found. One the year before, and this last one you see below is just this year. Very impressive. You see these holes are where the juice poured out into, kept very clean, with lead pipes, as I said, and even once it went into the basins, everything was plastered white, plastered with lime mortar, which is antiseptic, naturally antiseptic, and things were kept clean. The area was covered, as you'll see in a moment. So this is a food processing area, not a normal kind of channel. And here you have some aerial photographs, well, actually boom photographs that Khirbet Sheik took, and he used them to plan the vats and the processing area after the crushing of the canes and the collecting of the sugar juices. So this was the previous year, last year. This year we have, but before we get to this year, we have a reconstruction that we've done of the sugar processing areas. There you have up above the water turning the large crushing wheels, and then collecting vats, and eventually here on the right, the pots, the specialized pots, which are used to crystallize the sugar juice. And this plan here, you see here in colored red, yellow, and green, is a similar type of sugar factory, very similar, in fact, that's found in Cyprus. The only difference here is that ours is older. So ours seems to be the prototype. It's also larger. Ours has two pressing areas, pressing rooms. So very much here, we're looking at the Ghawr Safi, Zoara site as not only being the largest one known, but also earlier and therefore probably the prototype. Because if you look at some of the excavation reports, or if you go to Cyprus, you'll see very, very similar architecture and plans of sugar factories. Here we have now the latest things that we found this year. Various channels, various areas for boiling the sugar juice. You see here in situ sugar pots, the sugar cones, sitting in situ, all covered with white lime, which would have kept the area clean. Here on the right, there's two depressions. We've actually found 12, which were where the boiling areas were. And this copper cauldron, or dusut, which had been sitting in Kerak for many years and was found in the Ghawr Safi, would have sat in one of these depressions. Now we found several broken pieces this year, also exactly the same type of copper cauldron, the same forms and the same section of it. and there would have been a series of these, 12 or more, used for boiling sugar, condensing the sugar juice, and eventually um, put into specialized pots for crystallization. Here is now the latest photographs we've had. Aerial photographs again, the boom photograph on the left by Khirbet Sheik showing you here the series of vats, the boiling areas, the boilers, and the rooms where the sugar pots would have stayed and would have crystallized the sugar. This photograph here was taken in September by the APAMIA project, which is recording great things all across Jordan. And you can see the extent of our excavations. You can see our spoil heap. You can see the areas where there's the burnt areas. And you can see also even how we've made these stairways to guide visitors around. But at the moment, this is backfill, as you can see in this photograph, and waiting for future restoration work. Now, this year, we uncovered, as I said, this area which was the clean processing area for this the food. Part of our grant this year was from this AIA-Hilton grant, American Institute of Archaeology Hilton grant, and in collaboration with the Al-Himma Society, we were able not only to excavate but also plan. And you see here the springers of the arches. There was a series of arches. Uli Belval, who is in the audience, very skillfully has planned these, and we intend to resurrect two. There were two series of these, two rows of them, and they would have covered the area and kept it clean. Because again, we're looking at an industrial area, but it's a food processing area, so it has to be kept clean. One of the arches you can see here on the right is still in situ. We propose to re-erect, as I said, several of them experimentally, and in the future perhaps more, and they should be quite interesting sight for visitors to see. Now, something else which has never been shown before in public was a find that we had earlier this year. In one of those rooms, those long rooms where the pots were stored, so the sugar would crystallize after the boiling process, we found 4 clay, unburnt clay, which had these stamps. And it seems to us now that these were official Mamluk state stamps, and they were used in the storerooms to mark this property that belonged to the Mamluk state. There's a similarity to some of these large trucks that travel through country to country, and they have these lead seals sealing what's inside, keeping it, untouched, and people won't steal it, I suppose. And these stamps, as far as we can make out, actually say Hatem. They're unique discoveries. We've shown it to a couple of Mamluk historians, scholars. Nobody has seen anything like it, so we're very proud to present this today here for the first time in public. Now, the USAID SCHEP Safi project didn't focus, and its objectives weren't focusing on excavations and research, even though it relied on that to promote the site. But the specific money was to make the site, particularly a visitor, more accessible. So we created paths of these reused pallets, wooden pallets. We made new signs presenting to the public. Here we have myself discussing with the director of antiquities, the ex-director, Dr. Jamhawi, and the U.S. ambassador, the site. Where there was a site visit and a presentation last year, and that marked the end of the SCHEP project after 3 years. But there is an ongoing continuity with the site, and the trainees and the site stewards are actively involved in trying to promote the site as much as possible. I said that the US SCHEP project didn't support the research, but it did produce site brochures and signage. Much of this was relied on previous research. In this instance here, a publication that I did after the international conference, we it was held in Greece on the origins of the sugar industry. SCHEP did support a couple of people going to this conference in Greece. And more recently, Aramex, and particularly our friend Fadi Gandour, founder of Aramex, has paid for the republishing, reprinting of this book, which is now out of print. And these are available today here also at ACOR, but also in the library if any of you want to read them. And if anybody is interested in this, is a very good, up-to-date publication on all aspects of the sugar industry in the East Mediterranean. So, relying on previous research sponsored by the European Union and Aramex in this case to promote the site on site with signage and site brochures. Studies, though, have continued, and some of the interesting finds, which I can begin to now present to you today. We spoke about the connections with India, sugarcane coming from India originally, and the techniques and maybe many of the objects. Through our studies of animal bones, and here we have Dr. Louise Morton of University College London studying them with one of the trainees here. One of the trainees here has learned even to study animal bones. We've found Zebu cattle. Zebu are coming from India, and they're particularly used for tilling the fields, not for milk and meat. So interesting that we have a new species being brought in along with the sugarcane and other objects from India. Now here also cattle being identified here through our studies of the animal bones. I spoke about these specialized sugar pots. These are the two examples, the upper cone, which has got a hole in it just there, and the lower collecting pot or molasses pot. So the upper one is where the sugar would crystallize, and the molasses below would either be used for food or could be reboiled and maybe recrystallized. But these are the two basic pots, and they are made on a massive scale. So we have now also industrial-made pottery. And here we have the examples of pottery. Probably more than 90% of our pottery is sugar pots. So the site was an industrial sugar-producing site, but also producing locally pottery. And here we have kiln walls, we have kiln tripods, and a number of sugar pots that have been stuck together by accident. So these are mistakes. All this is evidence that they're firing and producing these pots on site in special kilns. Here we had, through the USAID SCHEP project, we also trained some local people in pottery sorting, pottery restoration, and here you have the example of, in the local museum, in collaboration with the Department of Antiquities and our Greek conservator here, restoring some of the pottery. Some of the pottery, though, is also very fine. You can see here fine glazewares from Syria, Iraq, Egypt, Safi, and also some now being made in Safi itself. So evidence of international trade and a fairly wealthy community here. But we also have inscriptions on more simple pottery, such as this handmade pot. This here, inscriptions that says Muhammad. Another pot here, which has got a longer inscription mentioning, I think is an invocation. But it shows that the society is literate. They're writing on simple pots, but also, on more formal pots. But that's an important factor that it comes to light here from the Abbasid to the Ayyubid Mamluk period. Glass, there's many glass vessels. Here you see various glass. These are Islamic period glass bangles, some of the finest found in Jordan, a glass stamp with an Arabic inscription, and even mosaic cubes, most likely coming from a church, which indicate there was a glass mosaic wall and ceiling. Coins, you see here various coins from the Byzantine through the Crusader and Islamic period that have been found to help date our site. And the final period of occupation here, which is some of the structures that we saw from the surface, were actually identified not as part of the sugar factory of the Tawabin as-Sukkar, but rather for the flour mill and for the later period Ottoman fort during the Ottoman period. And we have here now very exciting evidence that we found of the final occupation of the sugar factory here in the Ghawr Safi, and that's evidence of the Arab revolt exactly 100 years ago in 1918. We have here bullet shells. A number of them were found that were in Ottoman and German. They were Mausers, so the soldiers were shooting out from this fort at the attacking what seems to be the Arab Legion, because we found bullet shells here, that the cartridge shells that are English, and even one that was from the French Foreign Legion, which we know is allied with the Arabs and the British and Lawrence. So we also have a historical document from 100 years ago talking about Ibn Hamza that came down from Shobak and came and stormed this fort in the Ghawr Safi and camped in the Ghawr Safi. So we have recent historical sources, we have this military evidence, and clear, end of occupation for the sugar factory. But as this is 100 years and this is the anniversary of the Arab Revolt, it's a nice way of concluding our project and the site. And in fact, indeed, these will be all in the publication, which will come out next year. Finally, to the site museum. The site museum had been an ongoing effort on my part with the Department of Antiquities and the Ministry of Tourism. It's been built some 10 years ago now, and we've been working on the exhibition, trying to upgrade it periodically. The SCHEP project was part of this. After the initial signage and building of the museum, the SCHEP USAID project helped in upgrading. I showed you that we did some work in the museum with the storage facilities and the conservation. This is a photograph of inside the museum and the original plan. This has now been updated. We have even some new cases which we've added to this. And the local community are always visiting the site. You can see here local school groups. We had the international conferences coming to the museum. So there's a very obvious connection here with the outside world and this area which 20 years ago was not very well known. If you remember my original slides, which showed tomb robbing and local people just trying to get what they could to sell to feed themselves. Here now we have a completely different story where the site's being promoted, there's some tourism income, and the local school groups and the people have now a connection, an identity to this ancient site. I mentioned to you the USAID SCHEP Museum training program. This was extended finally by putting in some more objects and upgrading them. Here you have some of the new exhibitions. And just a month ago, actually weeks ago, actually days ago, some of the new exhibition cases, actually with the support of the American Institute of Archaeology and Aramex, even put on display some more objects such as this mummy, which Dr. Rula Shafiq was in the audience here is doing some testing of. The project concluded with SCHEP and the site stewards and trainees were awarded. The Al-Himma Foundation of Jordan continued the project where USAID SCHEP had left off. And that, I think, is an indicator of the success of the project, because here we have a local NGO foundation that deemed it was such a successful project that it would continue it. And this is what we did this year in 2018, along with the the American Institute of Archaeology, in combination and conjunction, whatever, with the Hilton International, and they funded us to do some basic work in the factories. As I mentioned to you, we were doing resurrections of some of the arches, but also continuing the local projects. Unfortunately, though, during the year, we noticed that nearby there were some trenches that were excavated while we weren't there. And you can see here, very nice square, just like the ones we did. And so we have to constantly be vigilant against, agricultural activities and also tomb robbing. But this is why it's important that the project continues. It's important that we're seen to be working with the local community, which we are, and that we return regularly. Here you see the site as it is today. Also, unfortunately, some of the signs that SCHEP paid for have been damaged. The actual gate, the lock has been broken, and people can go in there freely, which is not bad on the one hand, but it's on the other hand, it's not protected. It shows that there isn't protection to the site. So sad that is the case only a few months after our project ended. But what we hope that will, keep generally the Ghawr Safi project alive is a private initiative. So there has been some private initiated enterprises. In the museum itself, a local entrepreneur has set up a museum cafe. You see here quite a stunning photograph with lights. There's agritourism, which is started with a Safi kitchen and kind of a southern Ghawr company where people collect their vegetables and actually cook their meal, traditional meal. And here we have some of the people doing that, and even making new mosaics with the expertise of one of the mosaic conservators who was trained in conserving mosaics. Now there's a couple of people involved in making mosaics, and this is all kind of something which is a private initiative, and we hope it will help to enhance the local community and make it a more sustainable project beyond our participation. The final publication of the Ghawr Safi, 21 years of work, surveys, archaeological work, conservation work, historical studies, is now about to be published. It's finished. You can see here the cover and the table of contents. If anyone's interested, they can sign up for the publication, which will be out next year. And we hope that there will be a second volume coming that will include all the final studies. So that's all that I can talk about this evening. And I hope you've enjoyed it. And thank you very much.